Welcome to Shelf Help. Today we're speaking with Ryan Gill, who is the Director of Marketing at Three Chord Bourbon, who is joining us from Memphis. Launched in 2017 by what I think Ryan would call a musician's musician, which we'll dive into here in a second, along with a pretty long time whiskey maker. Three Chord Bourbon focuses on producing spirits with a perfectly tuned taste. And then prior to Three Chord, Ryan spent a good chunk of his career on the off-premise retail side of things, which I think is going to make for a pretty interesting conversation here. Just first off, for the listeners, Ryan, that aren't that familiar with Three Chord Bourbon, maybe just give us a quick lay of the land, just in terms of kind of the origin story, the why behind the brand, some of the core products you guys offer, and some of the main places that listeners can currently get their hands on them. And we'll start there.
Yeah, so Three Chord started by a musician named Neil Giraldo. He's a producer, songwriter, guitar player. Basically, growing up, he saw spirits as a communal thing that was within his family. Sicilian, grew up in the Sicilian home where his granddad was making grappa in the basement and stuff like that. And they had their big family meals, and he would learn to play guitar and sing as part of that. And it was just kind of this big communal thing. And then he got into music and bands and performing, and he loved the communal part of that as well. And so, a few years ago, he decided to slow down on the touring and decided to start up a new company. And when he did, said, well, let's get into spirits, because that was always the connection to him, was that communal element. And whiskey definitely has that element. That's one of my favorite things in working whiskey, is meeting all the other people that are the big whiskey people, or even people in other companies. There's so much camaraderie in this little industry. The bottle shares of allocated things and hard to find things, and other brands just helping each other all the time. That's like I said, one of my favorite things about this industry. As far as Three Chord right now, Three Chord is always available online, threechordbourbon.com. We worked with a retail partner that ships to 43 states currently, so you can be found just about anywhere there. And then also there's a store locator on threechordbourbon.com where you can find it in your area. We do have distribution through about 40 states currently, but we've got solid distribution in probably 25 states or so.
Okay. Cool.
So we're pretty widespread, but online you can find a lot of our limited releases and things. I know we're going to talk about those a little bit later.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, I think that's a great intro. One thing I wanted to dive into first, I know you've got a bit of a unique and what I assume to be pretty valuable background, then in that you spent, I think, more than 10 years, running some of the top off-premise wine and spirits retailers in Tennessee before shifting over the brand side. So I'm just curious, in what way have you found that your pretty extensive retail background has just been pretty valuable in running marketing for a brand selling into those same kinds of stores?
Yeah, it's honestly given me such a great perspective that has helped me on a daily basis. I was the first guy within our company that was hired that was from the retail side. And so we had people that had been longtime bar people, longtime supplier reps, distributor reps. I worked in retail for 14 years and was running, one or two stores for most of that time. And, I also got really into retail science and marketing. And, I always would, on a daily basis, look at my stores and say, okay, how could these products be marketed better? How could how can we encourage people to pick them up off the shelf? And it really made me think what brands were doing things right, what brands were doing things wrong, and be able to see, okay, if I were to have a brand, this is what I would do. And so with Three Chord, I was lucky enough to join it at the right time, where each year I've been with the company, I've been there for 5.5 years now. I think each year my role has been different. So it, started off in sales just in Tennessee, and then expanded to regional sales, and then moved over to single barrel sales and working with a lot of whiskey clubs and things like that. And then, evolved to the marketing and brand development side, which is really my passion.
Is there I'm sure once you're running, multiple stores, I imagine you may not have been in the buying room on a day-to-day basis, but at some point that was at least a part of your job at some point, at least hearing some of the, the pitches and new brands coming in, trying to get on the shelf. Is there a specific pitch tactic or two that you found often worked when you were on that side of the table or your team members on that side of the table? And are you guys implementing a similar strategy when you're trying to get on the shelf?
Yeah, what's really interesting about that is, I think adding to my perspective was when I did start doing regional sales as well, because I started to realize that the way that retailers take in products and pitches is different around the country. And so, for me, when I joined the company was mostly in the North and Northeast. And then we expanded down south and came into Kentucky and Tennessee and Georgia. Me and our Kentucky rep used to talk all the time about how the questions we got from retailers were totally different than the questions that the retailers up north were asking.
Interesting.
Flavor profiles were different, preferences were different, but just the pitches were different. It was really interesting. So for me, I always really, I kind of grilled people when they came in, when suppliers came in, and I would give honest opinions and tell them, look, this is what you should be doing, and this is what you shouldn't be doing, and this is what works in my store, and I would want to know, and this is coming from a wine background as well. Wine was a big focus for my store for a long time. And with wine, you can really add up the value with tangible things. Oh, was this in oak? How long was it in oak? Was it in new oak or used oak? You could understand why the cost increased. Was it from one small vineyard, one lot? Was it from, a giant area that's just a blend of a lot of stuff? You could ask the right questions and understand what the value should be. And that would help you understand, is this product overpriced or is this a good value? And so, with whiskey, I would do the same. I would be asking, I need to understand more about this product. What's going into it? What makes it worth this price to the customer? And, it was definitely interesting because, like I said, there was some questions like that weren't necessarily being asked in the company before we expanded down south. And, Kentucky and Tennessee people really get into their bourbon. So that was, that was definitely an interesting part of it.
And I never really thought about that, like the different, regions, parts of the country would have that different of palates and taste preferences. You think about food and beverage categories, it's pretty consistent across, whether you're on West Coast, East Coast to a large extent.
We were doing, so I was running the single barrel program for a long time. And with the single barrel program, you really could start to tell the taste differences because in the South, we like our sweet tea and Coke and stuff like that. And you would actually have people that chose whiskeys that have sweeter finishes down here as opposed to up north. It was really, it was an interesting learning experience just to see wow, it really does make a difference. These people do have totally different palates based off of the culture around them.
Moving down the supply chain a bit, those brands, they have a successful pitch, they get on the shelf. What were some of the biggest mistakes that you saw brands make in terms of how were they actually marketing themselves in store or supporting sell-through, and any lessons in that area that are now guiding your team's retail support playbook, let's say?
Honestly, I think the biggest thing is not having follow through on anything. There's a lot of brands that think you just get onto the shelf and you expect it to move. Whether I think there's a big disconnect between digital marketing and in-store marketing. There's a lot of brands that think, okay, I'm going to do lots of Facebook ads and I'm going to build this unique story online and this cool look, cool website. None of that matters if the person is just walking into a retail store and seeing your brand for the first time. I feel like that gets missed so often. Things like shelf talkers that either are eye catching or just have a score or something quick that can grab somebody's attention. Interesting displays that don't just blend into everything else.
Yeah.
Having displays that fit the store. So different display options, for example. So I ran one store that was, only a few thousand square feet, but it was connected to a Costco. This is before Costco was selling wine and spirits in the state. And, it was tight for space. And so displays, they really had to be compact display areas. And, the net store that I was running, we had 10,000 square feet and we wanted it to be really nice and open and have these cool, open, interactive displays. We wanted it to be an experience when you came to the store, whether it was sights or sounds or smells. And so we were constantly looking for things like that. And it was amazing how few brands offered anything that would fit those things. I mean, it was a monthly, we had these two giant displays in the front of our store, right in the window front. And I mean, it was a monthly challenge to find a new brand to build out a large display for that area. It should have been a great opportunity, but it was basically, only the guys with the budgets of Brown-Forman and Constellation and Diageo, they were the only ones that were doing anything unique. And like I said, I think it really just goes back to people focusing too much on everything outside of the store when it comes to marketing, and not necessarily once that person walks into the store that has not heard of you, how do you get them to look at you for the first time and pick up your bottle?
And building on that a little bit, I'm thinking, are there any ways that you might think differently about, these are three kind of broad categories, but let's just say like trade promotion, sampling, or limited drops, anything that you maybe might think differently about, just thanks to seeing firsthand how these tactics actually played out as the person on the other side?
Yeah. Tastings is a really interesting one because a lot of brands spend a lot of money on tastings, and, you hear the phrase liquid to lips all the time. And, I can't tell you how many times people buy a bottle because they're seeing a tasting and trying it right there on the spot, but then they end up just going back to whatever they normally get the next time that they're in the store. They need to be judged on more than just how many bottles they sell that day. And it needs to turn into conversions to loyal customers. And I think that there's a bit of a disconnect with that for a lot of people. Just because somebody tastes your product for the first time, taste is only part of the overall sale. People need to actually connect with your brand in some way, especially in the whiskey category. There is not as drastic of differences in the taste of whiskey from one to another as there are in flavored vodkas or wine, different wine varietals or things like that. It is something where you really have to make an actual connection with the people through your brand's story in general.
That definitely resonates. A bit of a similar track, like, based on that retail experience that you had when you're now analyzing performance at retail. Are there any metrics or signals that you pay close attention to, especially ones that maybe most brand marketers don't, just because you're on that other side, understand what's actually important to the retailers?
Yeah. So, I've recognized over the last several years being on this side, talking to other brands and even within our own company sometimes, your focus is always on either cases leaving our warehouse, or like shipments or depletions at distributor level, right? That stuff matters the first time. But then you got to start paying attention to the reorders, the pull through on the shelf. I can't tell you how many times I see Diageo used to do a really interesting job of, they knew that their products, if they wanted their bump in sales each year, they would just put out a new product, right? They would put out a new flavor of vodka, a new flavor of Crown, something, some new interesting drop that would bump their sales up for the year. Because everything else, they just got to maintain. And then they drop something new and it increases.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people try to do that, but that's, instead of just bumping up in their sales, what ends up happening is their core products are dwindling because they're not getting pull through, and they try to replace it with a new product. And so what ends up happening is you're constantly losing sales, and you're losing sales in states and, particular SKUs, and you're just replacing them by opening up new accounts, new states, putting out new products, and you're not paying attention to the fact that your product's not actually moving. I think that so many people don't even stop to realize that until it's too late, until it gets to a point where you're like, oh, I've now hit as many states as I'm going to grow to. Now my sales are dwindling.
Right.
It's just, I've run out of, I've run out of shells. It's right. Really a shell game,
Yeah.
And, I think that that's been really one of the most interesting things to see. Just talking about metrics, people not paying close enough attention to, okay, on a product by product basis, how many reorders are you getting?
Yeah.
How often? And that's what you really need to be looking at to determine the health of your brand and your products.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it's a bit of like that saying, robbing Peter to pay Paul, but almost like worse than that, because from what I know, it costs a lot more to keep launching a new product or new flavor, because you got to spend all the money to kind of get attention around it versus continue to push the existing products that are already on the shelf, right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's a, almost like a Ponzi scheme that you don't even realize that you're the one doing it. Yeah. You're the head of it and you don't even realize it because you're not paying attention to what's happening below.
Yeah, totally. This is a bit more of a broad question, but how would you say, just thinking about this off-premise retail channel landscape a bit holistically, like thinking about it over the past 5 to 10 years, what are things like, top, I don't know, a few 2 to 3 things that really come to mind as like the biggest changes you've seen, focusing on ones that you feel like have had the biggest impact on how they actually affect brands?
I think the biggest change has been on the distributor level, and that's been the biggest impact on the off-premise side of things and how we interact with them, because distributors, their jobs have changed a lot. I think that the more centralized these large or consolidated these large companies have become, the more weight they pull. And, you're seeing them do things like, Sazerac pulling out of, the big guys and saying, you don't give us what we want, we're going to pull all of our products from you,
Right.
Or, these guys putting their products solely with one distributor across, 10 to 20 states, things like that. It's made it to where the brand, those big conglomerates have more power than the distributors, and they know it. And they're able to, for a long time, they were trying to compete with the smaller brands by saying, well, we're just going to do what they're doing and do it better. And
right.
We're going to squeeze them out on the shelf. We're going to, I remember they're going to come out with new products all the time and, make sure there's not enough room on the shelf for the little guys. Right.
Yeah.
Then it turned into, well, we're now doing surveys and doing allocations, and you have to give us this much space or buy this much stuff of this product to get this. That's really changed over the years. And, it's been interesting because now if you're not one of the big guys, you can't depend on the distributors as much as you could a decade ago. Even pre-COVID, it's not their fault. It's just they now have to prioritize, who's paying their bills and, who can pull out, and the drop of a hat and, really make them have to have layoffs and things like that. I spoke to one distributor that was telling me, they had incentive programs for, lots of brands. And one of them was $100 a placement. I mean, really big number. And they didn't even tell their team about it because they were like, it doesn't matter. Like,
Right.
it used to be the salespeople would look at the distributor salespeople would look at their monthly calendar, see, okay, what are my incentives? How do I hit these goals? Now it's, okay, I just got to keep my job because I have to hit the goals that are put in place by these top 5 companies.
Yeah.
And everything else is just, gravy. But, I really need to only focus on these guys, and everybody else needs to take care of themselves. And, it's made it a lot harder for, other brands across all spirits.
Yeah.
You have to spend more money now to have a sales team because you can't depend on the distributors as much as you could previously.
Yeah.
That's really been the biggest change in the industry, I think, over the last decade. I'm a big sports fan, and it's. I always think of the analogy of how like the NBA has turned into a players' league. It's all about the stars, and they're able to demand trades and things like that. And that's how the spirits industry has turned. The stars are now in control. It used to be, the distributors were in control, and not anymore.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Expanding a bit, and now you've been on this brand side for a bit. What have you found that's really key to winning in this on-premise channel versus the off-premise channel?
I think a big part of it is the change in how to look at the on-premise over the last decade. When I was a buyer, this is pre-COVID in particular. One of the questions that you would ask a brand manager when they came into your store, or salesperson when they came into your store, was, what restaurants or bars around me can I find the product in? Because the idea was people are going to try it first at a bar or restaurant, and then they're going to spill over to your store to pick up the product, right? Yeah. That's not the case anymore. That's just not the case anymore at all. And I think a lot of brands are still playing the old playbook a lot of times, but that's, I've done a bunch of surveys that show it. People don't care about that anymore. That's not the first place they're trying stuff.
Right.
It is so rarely the first place they're trying stuff now. People would rather go, if they're going to a restaurant and they're going to order something, they're going to, order a call brand, or they're going to order just something from the well, which they don't care what it is. They're not going to then turn around and go look for it somewhere.
Yeah.
You basically have to build your following through, your brand outside of on-premise, whether it's retail, whether it's reviewers, whether it's, one of the surveys that we had done was just finding out exactly that. Just, where are people learning about products for the first time?
Yeah.
What's encouraging the first purchase? And it was strongly weighted by reviewers and liquor store employees. And those are the top 2 by far. And way at the bottom of the list was, I tried it at a bar or restaurant. And we realized that's not where you should be putting your resources,
Yeah.
Now you look at a lot of that bar and restaurant scene, and it's so price driven now, because people have their handful of call brands, and now there's so many brands that have allocated stuff that'll be just allocated to the on-premise, top tier people, so that they have those things. And then everything else, it's about price. It's, how do I get the cheapest thing for our customers so that we can make the highest margins?
Yeah.
They realize it doesn't matter if it's Four Roses small batch or Four Roses yellow label that's going into your cocktail.
Yeah.
Like when you're looking at a menu, people don't even ask the question.
Yeah.
So why would you, as a bar owner, why would you buy the more expensive one? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That's been the most interesting or those have been the most interesting revelations.
You mentioned like the importance of the liquor store employees in terms of impacting purchase decisions. And, I spent a lot of time have spent a lot of time in the cannabis space, and similarly, they're called bud tenders at dispensaries and that space. And brands have, realized long ago that investing a lot of time and resources in them is really important, especially in the cannabis space where there's a lot of lack of knowledge. And so when someone walks in and asks the bud tender, what should I buy? If your brand's the first thing that comes out of their mouth, like, you're going to win. Is that, based on what you said, in terms of liquor store employees, the research you've done has a big impact? Or do brands invest a fair amount of time and resources in those liquor store employees in terms of education, or I don't know if incentives are even allowed, or is that still, even though the data shows that they're important, do brands not give them as much attention as maybe they should based on what your data shows?
The toughest part of that has been the post-COVID turnover. So the data shows that's where you should be focusing your time and efforts. But you spend time, educating a staff, and a month later, it's all different staff.
Yep, totally.
And so it's really, that's why I think a lot of it has become finding ways to not only make yourself stand out on a shelf to the customers and tell your brand story through your displays and your shelf talkers and things like that. You have to interest the liquor store employees now. Like, you have to have a product that makes them also be your first customer. They need to be the ones that are they're walking by the shelves every day. They should be the ones that are the first ones going, oh, this is new. This is different. I like this. Let me ask questions about it. The one thing that's, as far as budget and ways to focus on that side of things, is tasting bottles. In markets where you can have open tasting bottles, whether it's for the staff or the public, do it. Spend the money. That's because that can stay beyond just turnover. There could be, new employee, new shifts, whatever it is. You have a bottle back there for people to taste. That's super helpful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we talked about like the off-premise, on-premise a bit. Now that you've had some experience in both, like if let's just say you decided, hey, I'm gonna launch my own spirits brand next year, based on what you've learned so far, which of those channels do you think you would focus on first, or would you try to focus on both from the start? I'm just kind of curious, like what that playbook would look like, go to market, in terms of deciding between those two channels, if not both.
Yeah. So, strongly off-premise and e-premise.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the two now. On-premise, you almost have to have people asking for you on the on-premise side now. The alternative, and this is more of just a volume play. You have all of your off-premise stuff and your e-premise stuff, and you can come out with a low-priced, targeted product that is going to be on-premise almost exclusively. I've seen some brands doing a good job with that recently, where it's, you don't even have it on your website sometimes. Like, it's a promise. It's a product that you're not promoting on social media. It may not even fit in with all of your branding elements. It could be a different bottle shape. It could be, whatever it is, because what you're shooting for is, number one, volume, but number two, having your name of your brand on a menu. So, like I said earlier, people see on a menu Four Roses, but they don't necessarily ask, is it Four Roses small batch or is it Four Roses yellow label?
Right.
If you can have that name recognition through those drink menus and things, that's helpful. So that's kind of, I think that's why I'm leaning towards these days is, start off with that and then focus your work on the off-premise and e-premise.
Yeah, that strategy makes sense. Shifting gears a bit, I know the Backstage series has been a big part of the brand, especially lately. For those that don't know what that is, give us just kind of like the quick lowdown on the series.
Yeah, so Backstage series. So Three Chord, always been about music and whiskey and putting those things together and creating this community. A few years ago, so my background before I got into liquor stores and running retail and all of that, I was a concert promoter for a long time. So, music has been a big passion of mine forever. I wanted to find a way to connect it to the brand more. So, we were previously doing things like working with local musicians and local venues and, donating to charities like blues foundations and things like that. But we weren't connecting directly with, the fans, I guess is the best way to say it. So we started doing these collaborations. I started reaching out to people that I knew in the industry from, way back when. And, we started doing these collaborations. And the benefit of Three Chord and where it is as a company is because we've been successful. Uh, we've gotten some great reviews. We've gotten some chain pickups. It's made it where we've really spread into a lot of markets. And we have a strong e-commerce side these days.
Yeah.
But we're also small enough still that we can do custom projects.
Yeah.
And so, I put together a program where we could do these custom blends and custom labels with artists. Whether it's a one-off release or something that takes off and you start doing one or two a year, we can kind of run the gamut depending on the artist and what their fans are doing. So we've now worked with, I believe, 17 artists.
Wow.
It ranges from, the Allman Brothers Band and the Hailstorm to, Dinosaur Jr. and Lucero. We've had punk artists, metal artists, rock, country, a little bit of everything. So, it's been fun, and it's also really helped in that e-commerce side for us, just helping to really focus on that and get the product in front of people that are passionate about music. Because if you're going out and buying merchandise from a band, you're passionate about that band. You're not doing it just because.
Yeah.
It's not just another T-shirt. It's
Totally.
that band's T-shirt. So,
yeah,
we wanted to connect with those people that are the most passionate, and so it's been a really fun thing. And honestly, it's taught us a lot about our brand and our customer.
That's great. That sounds like it's been a win-win in a lot of ways. What do these collaborations with the musicians look like in terms of what they're responsible for? And then, if you're comfortable sharing it, I'm just kind of curious from like an actual like deal structure standpoint, what do these partnerships look like?
Yeah. So what we do is we try to make it as easy as possible on the artist. We try to put together kind of a turnkey program. So what we do is we have to ask them, depends on the artist, how whiskey knowledgeable they are. We say, look, you want to, you can either tell us what we have a conversation. You tell us what you like or don't like about different brands, different whiskeys, and we can come up with a handful of blends and send them to you based on that conversation. You pick from that, or we can send you some components and actually sit with you and do a blending session. And so it's been fun just seeing how different artists want to interact with that process. And then we've got a graphic designer that's great, that he came from designing concert posters. That's how I found this guy. Did some amazing concert posters and said, well, our brand is all about music and we want to connect with those people. Let's bring in somebody that does this for a living. So we brought him in, and he's actually become our graphic designer for everything we've done since. It's been fun. The artist they help with the whiskey, and then they give us some artwork to play with, whether it's a piece of merch or an album cover or something that they want our designer to use. And then we'll put that together. The deal structure is, it's typically a split, just a profit share, basically. So it is not something that, and I tell people this up front, like, this isn't anything that anybody's going to get rich off of.
Sure.
This is not something that these artists are doing it just for the money. We're not doing it for the money. And this is how we keep these collaborations inexpensive as well. A lot of times you see collaborations or licensing deals that the product's not worth the price. Reason for that, you typically take your price and then you add on the royalty fee. That's what a lot of people do. So what we do though, we look at that money that's going to the artist. We look at that as our marketing budget. We say if this product is a $50 product and has Hailstorm's name on it, it's because it's a $50 product. Like it's, that's how it should be. And that's, we want people to taste it. Like this was worth what I paid for it. This is not just a product that I paid for Hailstorm's name on it. So I think that, the artists that we worked with, they appreciate that. They get what we're trying to accomplish. They get that we're passionate about their fans and the music industry as a whole. And, that's why they worked with us. We're not for this type of deal structure isn't for everyone. We're not out there throwing out, $500,000 to go get, some arena artist or something like that. We're doing this because we just want to connect with fans that are really passionate. And it's been interesting even seeing how passionate some fan bases are versus others. We learned very quickly, it is not about how many Spotify plays per month you have or how many Facebook followers you have. It is how many people are coming to your shows and spending money and how many people are, actively engaging with you all the time.
Yeah.
How many fans do you have to have have your logo tattooed on them? Yeah. Those are the types of fans and types of artists.
What's been, in terms of like operational standpoint, what's been the hardest or like most complicated part about this project from like a operational logistical standpoint, whether it's the artist collaborations or SKU specific packaging and label work, or producing all the supporting content and assets, and any like process tweaks you've made along the way to make it easier?
There's a few things. I think one is finding a template for the label. Being able, we started off and it kind of evolved and we're making tweaks and changes as we went with each artist. Then we realized, okay, if we can create a template, then you don't have to, it's just a lot easier in general.
Yeah.
And then, it's already such a pain dealing with the TTP. They're so inconsistent with everything. And I can't begin to tell you how inconsistent they are on labels. And so if we're submitting, 10 new labels with different artists, we get totally different responses on different things. Being able to templatize that process has really helped. And then on the distribution side, so we started off with, okay, we're going to offer these products across the country, but these are small production. These are one-off things. Like timing wise, we're spending so much time getting them registered and getting them set up in the distributor system and all that kind of stuff to then do a one-off product that you're going to sell a handful of cases.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't make much sense. And so what we've done now is we pitch, we start off things through D2C and give it a couple months with that and see what's really doing well. And then we have the data of where those sales are coming from. And we can then go to those markets and say, okay, this band has a strong following in these 4 markets. We're going to then take the product into distribution, into retail in those markets.
Yeah.
That's been a much cleaner way of doing it. And and then the bands can grow their number of markets as they have a second release and third release and things like that. But there's infinite possibility with that. Starting off, it's definitely focusing just for the sake of everyone's time.
Yeah. You touch on the packaging and label templates and whatnot a little bit on a bit of a similar track. I think when we talked a few weeks ago, you mentioned you guys have been working on a rebrand. As I don't think you guys have launched it yet. So as much as you're like comfortable talking about, what's been the kind of thought process or our main goal behind why you guys decided to do a rebrand in the first place?
2 things. One was, I mentioned the Backstage series and how we learned a lot about the company through the Backstage series. We started to realize who our customer was and who we wanted it to be. And we realized that our current packaging didn't appeal to those people. We wanted something that was more music centric and really told who we were through our label, through our bottle. If you look at our current design, it doesn't do that so much. And honestly, what we've talked about a lot internally is we spent the first few years of the brand kind of doing what we needed to do, doing what you have to do to fit in the whiskey category.
Sure.
When we came out, when the brand was created 8 years ago at the very beginning, I mean, I can tell you from the retail side of things, when I was in retail back then, everyone was just chasing the legacy brands. Everyone was at that time was still trying to say, okay, these are the brands that are successful. How do we go take market share from them? And it wasn't about creating your own avenue and your own fan base. And it was just focused on that. I mean, everyone was just trying to fit into the bourbon market instead of stand out from it. So now over the last few years, that's changed. Now there's so much competition and so many different brands, and people are much more willing to go out of their way to try new stuff in the whiskey industry than they were 8 years ago.
Yeah.
It was a lot. I mean, I always say it's kind of followed like the craft beer timeline, where I saw it back when that boom was happening, where people went from always buying the same beer to I'm trying a new beer every time I'm coming in. The bourbon category became that way. People were looking to try new stuff. And so you didn't have to fit the mold anymore. And so we've been kind of discussing it for a while. And then the success of the Bat Stage Series over the last 2 years kind of confirmed it for us.
Yeah.
We said it's like our brand is having the same journey as a person, which is you do what you need to do to fit in. And then at some point you realize, you know what? I can just be myself.
Yeah. Sure.
And I want to do what's passionate to me. And so myself and our Michael Nanula, he's our chief commercial officer right now. And then Ari Sussman, our whiskey maker, the three of us kind of formed this little coalition where we've kind of been putting out what would make a brand that we would enjoy. The three of us are all passionate about music, but we have totally different tastes and styles. And so it was coming up with something that fit all of us that we could all get behind and something that was kind of more universal.
Yeah.
And, we're so passionate about it now, and the ideas are just flowing. It's crazy. I mean, every single day we are sending each other messages, ideas like what about this? What about this? Like we got to do these kinds of buttons and giveaways, these kinds of shirts. And this would be really cool. And, I had somebody that told me a great analogy recently. They said, it's like when you're going out with a group of friends and one of them's not there yet and you're trying to decide on where to eat. And somebody goes, well, let's go to this Italian place. And then you go, no, my friend, so-and-so, he doesn't like that kind of food. You know them so well that you know what their preference is.
Right.
So it's the same with a brand. Like if you create a brand that you know it so inherently well that you can then start making choices that fit with that. It's enlightening. It's, like I said, it's really been an amazing journey to just see how easy the ideas flow now as opposed to before, because we were trying so hard to fit into a box that it was never meant for us,
Yeah.
And so now we've broken out of that, and in July we'll be debuting it to the world, and I can't wait because it's been such a fun time, honestly, just building this entire brand universe around it.
So you had that 3 team that was kind of the behind the strategy from an actual execution standpoint, like doing the actual design pieces and also whatever kind of brand, repositioning work that was done. Was that done with that internal designer, or did you guys go with an external agency that you felt like could have more firepower to kind of holistic capabilities on that front?
So we ended up working with that designer that did concert posters that I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
He's with an agency, and so we just brought in his agency that he's with and said, look, this is what we're going for. And it was funny though, because the three of us, we understood what we were going for so much that it was very specific what we were looking for, and it became us just saying, okay, we want this. Yeah.
Yeah.
We want it to be very much like this, take this and bring it to life. And they did a great job with it.
Yeah.
And now they've been so involved in everything that they now understand the brand in a way that they can now create graphics for us quickly that fit our new aesthetic overall. And that's been nice too. Just having somebody else that's, it's so tough with an outside agency sometimes.
Sure.
To have them understand like your brand vision and honestly the vibe, the culture. That's so tough. You can try to put it into words on a brand guide, but somebody's just got to get it, and they got to be around you enough to understand it and be in that culture. And this guy having, he's I. He used to go to concerts back when I was promoting concerts 20 years ago, and he's still going to concerts, and he does these concert posters, and he's in the same scene. He gets the whole feel to it, which I think makes a lot of this a lot easier. And then right now we're definitely we're bringing in some outside help for things like setting up the new look for social media. Just trying to get that tone and that cadence of when to post, what to post. Before we were just throwing stuff against the wall. It was, all right, we like music, we like whiskey. Anytime we see something cool, we're just going to post it.
Yeah.
There was no specific rhyme or reason behind anything. And so just helping us to get more organized with that. We did a little social media, blanking of the word, evaluation, but we just comped ourselves to other brands, and we were posting like 4 times as much as the other brands. And it was just because we were just throwing stuff out there constantly. Right. And, we weren't getting as good engagement, and it was because it was just all over the place.
Yeah.
So we're bringing in somebody to help with that for a few months. And then right now bringing in somebody to help with, just getting the initial POS and giveaways and, that kind of stuff, getting all that stuff ordered. There's so many vendors you have to deal with, and it's a lot. One big thing, and this is why, this relaunch, we're calling it our volume 2, just playing off the music theme. This whole volume 2, we could have tried to start it, launch it months ago, but we really, really want to come out of the gate with everything lined up. Like, we want to come out of the gate with, I keep saying this is our second chance at a first impression. This is, we want to go out there the first time that we're going into stores and say, all right, these are our different display levels that we have. These are our shelf talkers. These are our boxes, which is another thing that we didn't talk about. But, boxes, that can be eye-catching for retailers. If you have a really cool box, it can make people want to stack it up because it just looks good in their store. Yeah. I want to have those things right out of the gate. I want to have an ad campaign. I want to have takeaways for consumers when they're at a tasting. I want to have the website built, the social media, the website, the online ads. I want that whole collectively to be this one vision and aesthetic. Yeah. So that's what we're doing right now. Just trying to get all of that built out. Yeah, I'm excited for everybody to kind of step into our new brand universe.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's super exciting. I mean, it sounds like you guys had a very clear vision in terms of, why you wanted to go through this rebrand process. It seems like others may not be as clear. So I'm just curious, if I was running a marketing for a spirits brand, told you I'm considering a packaging refresh, like what questions might you ask me that would help me just even confirm, is this the right strategy? Should we even been doing a rebrand in the first place?
Yeah. So a few things. So one would be earlier that metric we talked about, being able to see the actual health of your brand and is it connecting with people? Look at that. Number two, figuring out once you decide that you're doing one, I think that you should try to decide who are you, what are you passionate about, and then who are your customer, and making that connection. Number three, and I think this is where a lot of people, yeah, they get worried sometimes. You get so caught up on, I don't want to lose my old customers, so I'm not going to make this change.
Yep.
Well, if you had enough old customers, you wouldn't be making a change in the first place. Like, that's the reason you're making a change, right? So, that's, you got to be willing to take that chance and learn all the things take all the things you've learned about the industry, about all the things that have changed since you first created that label and put them to use. There's no point in just making a tiny tweak that isn't going to be noticeable.
If you're going to do it, right?
Yeah. If we were looking at it originally and we were like, well, if we're already going to have to go through the whole process of submitting new labels to TTB and registering them at all the distributors and all the states, why would we not just say, let's make new products? Let's, like part of this has been, it's not actually going to be even our same product mix. It's a new product mix. We've got very little carryover from the previous products, because we said, okay, what's new? What's changed? What are the new consumer trends? Like, why are we don't have to be stuck to what we did, 7-8 years ago. We could, we could do new things.
Yeah. Totally.
So that's been,
super helpful.
Those have been the big things, I think, to learn about yourself and learn about your consumer and just get everything ready and go for it. I think if you're passionate about it, people used to always say authenticity, and it became such a cheesy word. And but I gotta say, I think I understand it so much more now with having gone through this process, and I think that it will come through with the product and with our story and with the results.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. Last question for you, Ryan. Any brands or just kind of trends in the spirit space that you're kind of tracking or you're particularly excited about? Anything that jumps out at all?
Yeah, I think people trying to get away from chasing after the legacy brands finally. And I think, seeing stuff where people are, they're realizing you can be kind of a lifestyle brand. There's one brand that I've enjoyed watching what they've been doing is Filmland Spirits. They've taken this like B movie poster sci-fi thing and put it on bottles, and it's just creating this whole story around the brand that's different. It's attracting people that like whiskey and like that world.
Yeah.
Building everything around it, going all in towards that, not just the whiskey world. And that's been really interesting. And then even seeing some of these like whiskey influencers and podcasters and things like that, seeing them start their own brands now because they're able to do these little one-off things. It's tough to scale, and I've seen them find that out. But they're finding the right ways and just doing these little drops here and there, and it's been really fun to watch them learn about the industry and grow and turn into real brands. Yeah. And I mean, there's a few of them now that it's been really cool to see.
But yeah, Ryan, this has been awesome. Really appreciate the time. I think shared some rather really good valuable insights that people are going to really get a lot of value out of. Where can people follow along? Where's the best place to follow along with you? And then also where's the best place to follow along with Three Chord as well?
Yeah, so threechordbourbon.com, socials at Three Chord Bourbon, easy to find. Facebook, Instagram, those are the places where we're at the most. For me, Three Chord Ryan on Instagram, and then Ryan Gill on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Awesome, Ryan. Appreciate it. This has been great.